Hello everyone, welcome to week 3, and as you can see it's going very quickly, so I'm sure you're aware keeping up is going to be very important in terms of getting in your assignments, and if you're having any trouble, please reach out to me. So we're going to be moving now. We started with that first look at the larger conceptual ideas of the course, then looking at indigenous and shamanic traditions, then moving into Western medicine and its antecedents in ancient Greece, Christianity and Judaism. So I'm grouping things that are related so it has some flow to it, I hope. And so in this section, we're moving eastward, and I'm going to be looking at Hinduism and Buddhism. And so just as Christianity and Judaism and Islam are genealogically related, so are Hinduism and Buddhism. Although Buddhism moves out of India and into China and becomes influenced by Chinese culture, and I'll be looking at the Chinese systems of health and healing after that. So I'll be looking at, obviously, as with all of them, this is a vast tradition. So I'm going to be picking out certain aspects, such as we'll have a look at the yoga tradition, we'll have a look at Ayurveda, so some of the really well-developed systems of healing from within the South Asian tradition. So as you can see from this map, India is a vast country, and it's called a subcontinent, and there are many different regions within it. If it may be helpful to think of it almost like Europe, that each region is so different, it has different languages and so on. And so just at the outset, I want to say that it's very difficult to generalize when we're talking about the Hindu tradition because it is so varied and there is no central authority, but I'm going to pull out some of the strands that are common across the Hindu tradition. So Hinduism has no founder, it has no one holy text, and its practices are strikingly diverse. It's sometimes been said it's the place where the most number of approaches to the divine were allowed to develop. And this is partly because, as I said, there's no centralized authority. So approaches to the divine and to religion developed organically without a lot of oversight from, for instance, government. So diversity then is the hallmark of the tradition. And I just want to look at a few of the underlying ideas within the Hindu tradition. So first of all is the idea that time is endless, and so there's no beginning or end to time. So when we look at Christianity and Judaism, that idea of God creating the earth, there's many, many different creation stories within Hinduism. And so it's much more common to find the idea of just endless cycles of time that begin and end and then repeat. So generally the understanding is that the human soul, or Atman, is reborn, and so you are reincarnated based on your deeds. And so this is developed from the idea of karma. I'm sure it's a concept that you've all heard of, although I think when people use the word karma in the Western tradition, they usually mean what goes around comes around. That's not quite right. It's got part of it, but karma from a Hindu point of view is something that impacts you across lifetimes. So you come into this birth with a certain body, born to certain parents, due to the karma of your past existence. And so we also find the importance of timing in Hinduism. So astrology is a central part of the religion, and so it's not something that's done for amusement. I know even people that follow astrology, it tends to be seen as something kind of trivial that you look up in the paper for fun. But within Hinduism, it's taken very seriously, and so generally at the time of a child's birth, the priest or pundit comes and does the chart of the child, and that chart is examined for things like health, as well as when it comes time for marriage and arranged marriages are coming around, the charts are also used. So we also find in Hinduism a variety of gods and goddesses. So the divine can be male, female, or even in some cases a mixture of the two. And so there's also an emphasis on home practice, although obviously the tradition has temples. Most Hindus will have either a prayer room or a separate place somewhere in the home for the altar. So as I said, diversity is a hallmark, but one one of the key characteristics that Hindus accept, at least nominally, is the idea of the Vedas being sacred, and that's a body of texts that were originally oral, and they're often still chanted. You can go into a Hindu temple today and hear them being chanted. So they're ancient, they're in Sanskrit, which is the liturgical language of Hinduism. So if we look at Judaism, the liturgical language is Hebrew. If we look at Roman Catholicism, the liturgical language is Latin. So in Hinduism, Sanskrit is the language of religion, and so it's considered to be holy. The sounds, this is a very different concept, and I'll talk about it more when we get to yoga, but there's the idea that sound itself impacts the body and health. And so the Sanskrit syllables that are chanted in things like mantra practice are believed to be healing. So I want to turn now to health and healing as we see it in the Vedas. Text is drawn from the Rig Veda, the oldest of all the Vedas, and it goes back thousands of years. As I said, it was originally oral and then eventually written down, but it's generally said aloud even into the present. And the Vedas are prayers or hymns to various gods and goddesses. So the one we're looking at here is Rudra, who's understood as being a storm god, kind of unpredictable. So the priest would be chanting this in Sanskrit. And so the idea, we can see right from the beginning that health is connected to the divine. And so ritual and chanting and eventually meditation, we're going to see these all are ways to kind of stay connected and aligned. And so in this stotra, we hear, by the most healing medicines that you give, Rudra, I would attain 100 winters. Drive hatred away from me and anguish further away. Drive diseases away in all directions. Raise up our heroes with your healing medicine. I hear that of all healers, you are the best. Okay, so again, the idea that medicine emerges from the divine, and we're going to see another example of that shortly. Also, interestingly, drive away hatred. So there's a kind of an intimation here that how other people feel about you can impact you. So something similar to the evil eye that we find in the Mediterranean, and certainly there are many practices within Hinduism about trying to keep ill will away from oneself. So for instance, with children, they might tie a black thread around the body of the child, around the wrist, so for luck and to drive away envy, for instance. So raise up our heroes with your healing medicines. I hear that of all the healers, you are the best. And so again, the god as healer. And very much typical of the Vedas, I would attain 100 winters. So the ideal is to live to a healthy old age. I mean, that's nothing unusual. We find that obviously across all cultures, that the person is wanting to live to be, this is kind of a nominal number, but to be 100 and to stay healthy. We also find a stotra to the healing plants, and when I first came across this, I was really struck by how similar this is to shamanic and indigenous ideas of plants as living beings or divine beings. So that idea that they're not seen as inanimate objects, they're seen as part of the divine and almost sentient. And so there's a sense that the healer has to know the qualities of plants. And if you recall, when we talked about shamanism, the shaman, that was part of their training, was to learn about medicinal plants. And so it's interesting to see in Western secular medicine, pharmacology has been very much separated off from medicine. But what we're going to see in Hinduism and in Chinese medicine, the doctor is also aware of herbs. They may not compound them themselves, they may, but they're knowledgeable about healing plants. So it says here, the tawny plants were born in ancient times, 3 ages before the gods. So that's very interesting too, that the plants come before the gods. And so they're treated with a great deal of respect. Now I will meditate on their 107 forms. Mothers, you have 100 forms and 1,000 growths. You who have 100 ways of working, make this man whole for me. You mothers who are called plants, I say to you, you are goddesses. So So this idea, as I said, of the plant as a goddess, it's being spoken to as a mother goddess, which is very central within Hinduism, that idea of the divine feminine, and so the nurturing quality, the healing quality of the plants, and so you're meant to treat them with respect because they partake of the sacred. We also find, right from the time of the Vedas, the image of the divine doctor. So, similar to the idea of Asclepius, that the doctor has a divine template, a divine archetype. And so we find a few different versions of this, but definitely that idea that the healer partakes of the divine in order to be effective. One of the first images we find this template or archetype of the divine healer are the Ashvins, and so they're the twin sons of the sun god, and they are associated with healing, with medicinal plants, and with rescuing people from disaster. And this is a very important point in terms of the Hindu tradition, that health is just seen as being part of a larger sort of grouping of auspicious elements in one's life. So you ask for health, but you ask for things like prosperity and so on. So it's just part of good fortune, health, wealth, family. All of these things are just part of good fortune. So they're not really. It's not health is not really separated out in that way. Another figure who emerges very early in the Hindu tradition is Lord Dhanvantari, and I'm going to spend more time on him because he's a more ubiquitous figure. You don't hear too much about the Ashvins, but certainly Lord Dhanvantari you commonly hear it within the Hindu tradition, even into the present. So, according to the mythology, Indra, the king of the Devatas, of the gods, was once cursed with being bereft of all strength, energy, and fortune. So again, that idea that health is just part of that larger, all those dimensions of life, of larger good fortune. So, as a result of this curse, the Asuras, or demons, led by King Bali, defeated Indra in battle and took control of the cosmos. And so, in this myth cycle, you see that idea of good versus evil. So, Indra goes to Lord Vishnu asking for help, he and the other gods, and Lord Vishnu advises that he treat the Asuras in a diplomatic manner. And so, they form an alliance to jointly churn the ocean for the nectar of immortality called Amrit. And so in the process of churning, divine objects begin to emerge from this ocean. And at the end of the process, Lord Dhanvantari appears from the ocean carrying with him a pot of the nectar of immortality. So if you look at this illustration on the right-hand side, he's holding that pot of the nectar of immortality. So according to the myth, the Asuras snatched the pot containing the nectar and started quarreling about which of them would drink it first. So there's a whole other, I won't go into the details of it, of how the gods get the nectar back, but there's an ongoing struggle for this sort of power over life and death. And so Lord Vishnu foretold that Lord Dhanvantari would appear again in the world and teach men the science of Ayurveda. So according to the story, Lord Indra, seeing humanity so afflicted by pain and disease, pleaded with Lord Dhanvantari to descend into the material world and teach Ayurveda to the human race. So according to the myth, Lord Dhanvantari was born into a royal household in North India and eventually became king. We're told that even as a boy, he had religious tendencies. He was extremely disciplined and performed severe austerities. So according to the legend, he taught Ayurveda orally to the sages, so these wise people, and then they passed it on to their disciples, and that's how the knowledge came into the world. So the idea that Ayurvedic knowledge is coming from the divine. So it is written in the scriptures that one who remembers the name of Dhanvantari can be released from all disease. So in the present day, there are a variety of rituals that are done for Dhanvantari. So 2 days before the great festival of Diwali, the festival of lights, at dusk, a lamp pointing towards the north may be lit at the doorstep of the house to welcome Lord Dhanvantari, and so make sure that for the year you're having health and happiness in your family. So this day is known in the north as Dhanteras, And it's believed that Lord Dhanvantari destroys negativity and blesses his devotees with good health. And I just came across an article regarding a controversy. The current government in India is a Hindu nationalist government, and so they have been systematically trying to turn India into basically a Hindu state. Officially, it's a secular democracy, but we're seeing these changes. And so there was a move made to put an image of Lord Dhanvantari on the logo for medicine in India, and this has caused a lot of controversy because a lot of Indians are not Hindu. There's Buddhists and Muslims and Christians and Sikhs, and also people who have no religion at all. And so this has been quite controversial. So, if we look at this image of Dhanvantari, we see, as I said, he's got in one hand the nectar of immortality. He's got scripture in his hand, and so that idea that the texts on health and healing are actually seen as being scripture. And in another hand, he has the healing plants. So all of these aspects of health and healing. So this is an example of a mantra dedicated to Lord Dhanvantari, and I suspect some of you will be familiar with mantra. Usually in my classes I have at least a few people who have studied yoga, but the idea of mantras generally chanted aloud and, as I said, in Sanskrit. So this one says, I bow and humbly request Lord Dhanvantari, who is the embodiment of perfect health, respected by great seers and evil people, to remove old age, disease, fear, and death through his divine presence in all natural herbal medicines. So the idea that the mantra holds that healing energy as you're chanting it, and you're calling upon that God to maintain your health and well-being. I asked you at the beginning of the course to start to think about how you conceptualize your own body, and so I'm going to be looking at how Hinduism understands the human body. And as shouldn't be surprising, because it is such a diverse tradition, there is no one way of viewing the Hindu body. There's a variety of philosophical schools, and so yoga imagines the body. They're all related, but yoga imagines it slightly different than Tantra and so on. So I'm going to go back to the very first we hear about this, which is in the Upanishads, which are considered to be revelatory texts emerging out of the Vedas. And so these are sort of philosophical texts talking about how one achieves enlightenment. And so they talk about the body and the idea that the body is conditioned by the forces of karma, and you bring this history of your actions into the present life from former incarnations. So I want to look at the model that is presented within the Upanishads. So in the Upanishads, we find the model of the koshas, which the closest analogy in English would be sheaths. And so this idea that there's layers to the body, and some of you will be familiar with this idea that there are subtle bodies. It isn't just the physical body, there are subtle bodies as well. And so we find these sheaths, and so the first one is the Annamaya kosha, which literally means the food body. That's what we think of as the physical body that's created by our diet and so on. So that's the material body. Then the energy or breath body, the Pranamaya kosha, which has to do with the energy system. The Manomaya kosha, which is the mental body. Vijnanamaya kosha, the wisdom body, and then the Anandamaya kosha, which is the bliss body, which is considered to be closest to the soul. So from this model, the physical body is the furthest away from the soul in that sense, and then it goes into more and more subtle bodies as you work your way towards the Atman, or the soul. And so it's interesting to see in a lot of the Hindu versions of health, diet is important. Obviously, the physical body is treated with a lot of respect, and we're going to see that with yoga, but actually a lot of what is done is directed to the soul, and then that's believed to impact all the other bodies. And many of these modes of healing address all the different layers, and so there's various practices you can do for the different layers. So for instance, some of you will also be familiar in yoga with pranayama, so working with breath. That would be a way to work with the pranamaya kosha. So the idea is that you integrate all of these subtle bodies, and then you move towards the self, which is the goal of the religious tradition. Well, I just got a shock in looking up chakras. It's listed under WebMD, which shows you how mainstream this concept has become in Western medicine. It used to be considered very kind of hippie. Now, within the Hindu system, chakras have been talked about for thousands of years. It literally means wheel. So it's understood to be these centers of energy, understood usually as being stacked along the spine. Now, there's no one way of understanding it. There's a variety, so I don't want to say that I'm giving you a definitive picture here. But it's certainly the idea of the body as energy. So again, this is very, very different than the idea of the body as a car or a machine. So it's the idea of the energy body. And so that makes sense then that things like mantra and so on can influence the body because it's more subtle, it's made of energy. So the chakras begin with the root chakra called the Muladhara. And so this is generally understood as being at the base of the spine, and each chakra is associated with a color, with a particular, often with an animal. And so they're very elaborated, these illustrations. And so I'll look at the root and the crown chakra, and if you're interested, you can look it up. I'll link it for you. And so the Muladhara is associated with the earth element. It's the square. It's the most material of the chakras. So there's certain seed syllables that you would chant associated with bringing that chakra into alignment. And then you ascend through the chakras. And so you're going from gross to subtle, always in Hinduism, from gross to subtle, and subtle being the end goal. And so the crown chakra is associated often with like a kind of a violet color. And that's the point at which, if it's fully developed, the person is understood to be enlightenment, to have reached enlightenment. And so, which is called moksha in Hinduism. And so at that point, the person moves outside of the cycle of reincarnation, which is the ultimate goal. So chakras become a way of imagining energy and working with that energy to move the person towards enlightenment. I'm ending here with a quotation from B.K.S. Iyengar, one of the most influential pioneers who brought yoga, particularly asana practice, the physical postures, into the Western world. But nonetheless, he was a Brahmin. He was from the priestly caste, and so yoga for him was a spiritual practice. And so he writes, health begins with firmness in body, deepens to emotional stability, then leads to intellectual clarity, wisdom, and finally the unveiling of the soul. So I'm going to be talking about yoga in more detail in the next lecture, but just you can see that idea of moving from the more material to the subtle, as Iyengar is presenting it here. So you have to start with the body, and then you slowly move towards the soul.